Another week is over, and it is pretty clear that the AAA games industry is in a pretty terrible spot, and it will only get worse. To start out, my name is Ojiro. I've been developing games for a bit over a decade and a half, and let's get straight into the news just from the past week. Starting out with Dragon Age the Veilguard. They're both bad. Coming out to PlayStation Plus, unless you're living in the Middle East, in which case you're getting Realms of Ruin, because of course. We had layoffs from Warner Brothers, where they shut down 3 studios, including Monolith. Apparently, the game that they were working on with Wonder Woman cost over $200 million before it was canceled. And NetEase is talking about unloading a lot of their Western game developer investments because, investment wise, if you want to lose money, AAA games is pretty much the go to. Now, let's talk about Avowed for a minute. I think to talk about what I want to talk about next, Avowed is a really great example of where the industry is right now and what people have talked about. So the numbers for Avowed, not really good, not really good at all. And people were bringing up a lot of comparisons with Avowed and games that were released almost 20 years ago. We saw this is Avowed versus Oblivion, where we show this is a really great video. I'll link it below if you hadn't seen it, where it shows how lifeless everything is in a lot of these, in this particular game, but this is not unique to Avowed. We all have seen other AAA games where the worlds are just dead. Oblivion came out in 2006. It is almost 20 years ago at this point. And with the technology that they had at the time, this was revolutionary, right? This was really amazing stuff. When I think back to the point where I played a game and I thought, wow, this is truly phenomenal, it wasn't Oblivion. It was Metal Gear Solid 2. So if Metal Gear Solid 2 comes out, I had played Metal Gear Solid 1, fantastic game, but 2, got back in time here. But the second one comes out, and it is just the attention to detail that Hideo Kojima is putting in his games is truly next level for its time. This is pushing the technology of the PlayStation 2 to the limits to get an amazing game, and it only gets better in Metal Gear Solid 3, although the performance really dies in a lot of areas with Metal Gear Solid 3, especially if you're using a smoke grenade, but that's not particularly new to gaming, right? In this era, you have the worst tools. Like you don't have these kinds of tools that we see today. A lot of this, you have to roll out your own systems, you have to roll out your own engines, you have to roll out your own everything because the technology is just not there. We saw some of the greatest RPGs coming out of all time where we didn't have the off-the-shelf tooling that we have, nowadays. For example, best JRPG out of the Final Fantasy series comes out, Final Fantasy VI. It takes 1 year to complete. The best. Like, I know a lot of people like 7, and you may have your own, but I would say 6 is easily probably the best entry in the series. It really could use a remake. Though 7 gets a lot of the attention because when Final Fantasy came out on PlayStation 1, it was such a revolutionary game, again, for its time. That only took a little over a year. You still had a staff of like 100 to 150 people, but this was really like there were no tools for any of this stuff, right? You have to go out, and you don't have any of these fancy things where you can just be like, oh, let me just pay for this service and things are just suddenly better. It's not there. Final Fantasy Tactics starts development in 1995, releases 2 years later in 97. One of the best grid-based tactics games of that era, right? And here we are today. We have games that are pushing the envelope for its time. And now we look at game developers in these studios with seemingly infinite budgets, and they can't seem to get literally anything done. And I know a lot of you are going to say, well, it's because of Unreal. Unreal's the issue here, is because, blueprints or whatnot. No, if it were not Unreal, you would be complaining about the same lifeless games out of Unity. The issue is a creative bankruptcy in a lot of these companies where they just don't seem to care about a lot of the fundamentals. If I play a game from Hideo Kojima even today, I expect a level of quality. Now, unfortunately, with his work, as technology has gotten better, his stories have become more absurd. Like I couldn't get through Death Stranding. Like I started it and all I remember is the monster ad, product placements, and it just kept talking and it was like, oh, I can't do this. Like even Metal Gear Solid 4 was a bit much for me. And man, that guy, he's something special. But we should be in a place where we have like streamlined the ability for one, people to get into the industry and for us to utilize their manpower, and two, to have the tools so that we can build the kind of worlds that we want to build. Instead, when it comes to the teaching pipeline, we're looking at things like some stuff that came out of Sweden, where this is a game design program where it talks about men with breasts, talk about how like Cloud is queer or whatever. This made the rounds a while ago. I don't think I talked about it. It's really stupid. I had the I visited, it was one of the universities of California a couple years back, where I got to go to a graduation for a game design program. And I remember when the dean came up to address the class, be like, oh, you did it, you made it through the program. He focused on one thing and he was like, look, I'm really proud of you all getting through this class. You all are going to be pivotal, in the games industry, because you're going to go out into the games industry and you're going to make characters that are more diverse than anyone has ever seen. And that is not what the job is of someone graduating college in the for the games industry. I went to a game focused college. It was called Full Sail University out in Orlando, Florida. I went through the programming course. There wasn't a game design course back then, but I did have one game design class, and it was taught by Dave Arneson. Dave Arneson is one of the founders of Dungeons and Dragons, like one of the original guys. It was like him and Gary Gygax to start out. So we've got him. This is him at one of the Full Sail University like talks or whatever. Yeah, they made a big deal where they were like, "Look, we have one of the founders from D&D here at this college." It was really cool. And in that class, we'd had a couple lectures, but most of the time in that class, we were just playing games because he was like, "Look, you want to be a good game designer, you got to play good games. If you're not playing good games and you're just playing like bad games, you're going to make bad games." So we just played a lot of different board games. When he had smaller classes, what are you doing? Stop. Don't lick that. When he had smaller classes, he would play D&D campaigns with his students. My class was too big, so we did board games. It's a real bummer. But, we had someone that was legitimately good at teaching, or a subject matter expert on this particular thing. And we had other subject matter experts for the programming classes as well, mainly because a lot of Florida and did a lot of non-competes. So we'd have someone that would leave a job and they'd be a professor for like a year or two until their non-compete went up, and then they would go back to working in the industry, whether it was for game development or simulation, because Orlando, Florida has a lot of companies that work in military simulation. I remember another story more recently. I think this is about 4 or 5 years back. I had a colleague, or a coworker rather. He was going to do a game jam up in San Francisco. So he gets there. They're like, "Oh, pick a team because we're just going to do it, with random teams." And he finds someone that is a professor at one of the local colleges that teaches Unity. He had a couple of his students with him. He was like, "This is perfect. I'm going to work with this person that knows the tool, Unity, and it's going to be easier for us to make something." That professor didn't know what a game object is. For those of you that don't understand Unity or like aren't programmers or whatever, the most foundational part of what goes on your screen in Unity is a game object. Everything is based off of a game object. And this professor was like, "I don't know what it does." So my coworker spent the whole time teaching not only his professor, but his students how to use Unity when they should have known how to use Unity by being in this guy's class. It's like what they say, if you can't do, teach. And that is pretty much our entire educational pipeline for people that teach for the games industry. When I lost my job, I was like, oh, could I become a professor? Because I could probably go and be like, hey, don't be fucking morons. Make good games. This is what you can do. And then they were like, you need a master's. I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. No way. Not. What a waste of my time to go back for, like, I got a bachelor's. That's, that was expensive enough. But it's bad. The teaching pipeline for the West is bad. The utilization of tools in our industry is bad. The leadership that is at a lot of these AAA companies, it's like these people get in there and they just coast because they're getting paid for by publishers. Those publishers are largely run by investors. So when you have a case like NetEase, who is saying, hey, we're going to purge a lot of this stuff, we're seeing layoffs out of Warner Brothers. A lot of investors chase trends. The biggest example I can give you is live service games. When live service games were really popping off, everyone said, we need to make our own live service games. Sony was like, we need over 9,000 live service games, right? And then they said, we need more money. We're spending a lot of money on these live service games. We need NFT games, because if a JPEG is selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars, we could probably sell them for millions. And then it became, oh, well, we need AI. AI is going to solve video games. And then their solution to that was strip away the tooling that they could give players to mod their games, and then just give the creativity to a machine to say, hey, can you make levels for us? These people, they're not good at their jobs. Like, there's no other way to put it. A lot of these investors, they're in these positions. They don't understand games. They hardly understand investing. And they're the ones that are calling the shots with a lot of these game studios. And you can't just, for the AAA games industry, or the games industry in general, not even for just like big titles, if you're not a fully private entity where you are majority owned by your own company, you are going to have investors coming in telling you what to do, because that's just how business works. We can't say, oh, well, this games industry, they just need to be given a free pass to do whatever they want, because a lot of these game studios that we've seen in recent history that have been given a free pass end up having these games that are not only lifeless, they have awful writing, a bunch of terrible self-inserts, and they're ruthlessly mocked online and they cost, $200 million. On the other hand, we've got these investors that don't understand games, so they don't even know what to ask from the game studio on what to do. But they will look at successful businesses and copy them. So if the big thing coming up for the games industry is these investors say, okay, well, you all have been bad, you need to prove, like NetEase is saying, where it's like, you need to show us how you're going to turn a profit, like why people are going to like this. Maybe that means more focus group testing for them to give them some kind of information, though that's probably a bit of a stretch. I bet a lot of these investors don't even know what that is, or like they're like, of course I know what that is, and they're idiots, honestly, like a great deal of them. It's in a bad spot. The whole industry's in a bad spot. It's only going to get worse. I do not see some easy out for most of these game studios where they're just run very poorly. And that's not to say that they all are, right? We've seen a lot of really good games coming out of some places. Space Marine was excellent. Marvel Rivals has been really good. We've seen some more disappointing stuff out of Square Enix, where they're really diving into a lot of the DEI and censorship and the whole global audience nonsense that is going to be a huge detriment to them. I don't see that ending well for them because we've gone through that here in the West and we've seen how that turns out. And that turns out with a bunch of idiots running the show and running the product into the ground. The only thing where I'm looking at it and thinking this is a really positive thing for um, the games, maybe, yeah, it would be caught under the games industry is a lot of these people, they're going to lose their jobs. For some of them, they're not going to come back to games. And we know that for some of those folks, we don't want them back in games. But I do hope that people will jump on to the indie bandwagon and say, look, we've got these great tools. We know what we're doing. How about we make smaller scale games in the indie space where the people that care about making games can work together and come out with products that are loved or could be loved by people, and they own it. They don't have to ask for permission. They don't need to be told by some BlackRock investor that no, it needs to work with some diversity firm for them to get funding. None of that. You just have a small team making cool stuff. And that is going to be the best for the consumer, which is, the whole games industry would be okay right now if it was just making things that were best for the consumer. If it was making games for gamers, we would not be having any kind of issues. We are having issues because we're making games for crazy people. And then when they fail, crazy people are like, oh no, why are you all such bigots and hateful people? No, that's not how it has ever worked. The delusion that we've got in this industry right now is insane. And it sucks for people like me because it's my job. But all I can ask from you guys is to just keep voting with your wallets. The more of these shitty places that fail, the better it is for the long-term health of the games industry in the West. And we will see, in my opinion, a continued collapse for this old style of game development where we have 1 to 300 or 500, or in the case of Blizzard, like a billion people working in a studio and producing nothing with all the resources in the world. I could see us pivoting away from that in the West and moving towards a bunch of smaller studios, because with modern game development, I don't like, if I come up with a game and I have it totally ready, I don't have to pay to have a bunch of discs, printed and then shipped out to stores all over and then worry about building some kind of logistics network to make that happen. That's just not a thing anymore. You can throw your game up on Steam, Xbox Live, the PlayStation Store, and you could have access to, hundreds of millions of people that could potentially buy your game. So there's really no reason for us to be doing this old method of doing business where we have to have these publishers coming in that don't know what they're doing running the show, because that it's not working out too well for them. But that's all for today, I believe. I hope you all enjoy things on your end. I would say if you guys could, since we're talking about indie games, if you have any suggestions for things where you're like, this is a great game, definitely throw it in the comments. I had someone throw in some, was it Metroidvania style games a while ago, and I was like, oh, this is really fantastic. Just threw them on my wish list, and I'm like, oh, the next kind of sale that comes out, the better. So other than that, I hope you all enjoy yourselves, and thank you for your time. Farewell.